Hello, welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari, and today I'm joined by the Rhode Island Speaker of the House, Joseph Shekarchi. Speaker Shekarchi, how are you today?
I'm doing wonderful, Raymond. It's a pleasure to meet with you today. It's my first time, and I look forward to a very passionate interview with you.
And it's a pleasure of mine to have you on the show. Just diving right into it here, Speaker Shekarchi, this is your first term as the Speaker of the House in Rhode Island and the Rhode Island State House of Representatives after the previous Speaker, Speaker Mattiello, lost his re-election bid in District 15 to his Republican challenger, Barbara Ann Fenton-Fung, this past November. What was that overall feeling like when you realized that you are now the Speaker of the House here in this great state of Rhode Island?
It was overwhelming. It would happen extremely fast. I did not expect Speaker Mattiello to lose. I expected him to be reelected. And if you know anything about the way these speakers races, it was very, very fast, extremely fast on what to do. So I was, at dinner at Cello's with a colleague of mine, and we both were talking about how we didn't have a race this year. We were lucky because of COVID. Things were very different, and campaigning and running in a pandemic was much different than anything before. And you couldn't press the flesh, you couldn't knock on doors, and you had to really rely on a lot of mail. So it was difficult to do that, but the long short, it came together very fast. Then it's overwhelming feeling. And then what compounded that feeling for me, Raymond, this year was as soon as I got elected, Speaker Mattiello, the results came in about 8:30, 9 o'clock that night. By 11 o'clock that night, I had secured the votes, with phone calls and text messages with my colleagues to have enough votes to say that I had secured enough votes to become the Speaker. 12 hours late, less than 12 hours later, that morning at 8 o'clock, I received a call in the morning from then the Director of Administration, Brett Smiley, saying to me, congratulations, are you ready to do a budget? I said, a budget? What are you talking about, a budget? I said, I haven't even been elected by my caucus, and Speaker Mattiello is still the Speaker until November. I said, call Speaker Mattiello. And this is all Wednesday morning. And then I called for a caucus on Thursday night. We had the caucus. Caucus went well. It was 56-1. It was elated with it. It was first time I can remember. Larry helped me with it, that we did an open caucus. We invited the media inside of it. I thought that was important so the media can understand how the process works and the people of Rhode Island can see. I wanted to establish a tone of a transparency in the way I was going to be Speaker. And then on the very next morning, I got another call from Brett Smiley and say, congratulations, you got elected 56-1. You ready to do a budget? And I said, call Speaker Mattiello. And he said, we called Speaker Mattiello. He said, it's all on you. So I had the wonderful chore of putting together a budget, $13 billion, which was a lot for anybody, especially someone who never served on finance and never done a budget in his life. But we were able to do the budget. I'm extremely proud of the product that came out of negotiations with the governor and the Senate president. And the budget did not have any new policy initiatives, but it did not raise any taxes, did not cut any social services, and preserved the fourth year of the car tax reduction. So at the end of the day, it's all about the work product, and the work product was very good. And then off to the races we went. And it was a slow start because of the pandemic. We had to relocate and we had to mend our rules to allow remote voting and remote hearings. We had to do lots of these things. We had to do them very fast. And we currently have our sessions in the Rhode Island Veterans Auditorium because it's just not safe at the State House just yet. Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that you mentioned the budget, because that actually plays into my next question, because one of the biggest issues that is facing our state right now is our state's budget. And those on the fiscally conservative side of the aisle argue for a state with under 1 million people. Our budget is around 11 to 12 billion. You had mentioned 13, with what was previously a budget shortfall of about $500 million. And this has been a lingering problem in our state for years. They also like to point out there are states like Iowa, Maine, and New Hampshire, I believe, that have more land mass and more of a population than ours, but have a smaller budget. Just out of curiosity, why is our budget so high for a population of under 1 million people, and how could this lingering budget problem be addressed?
Because a lot of what people don't talk about in that same narrative you talk about is the things that we do as terms of our social service network, a safety network, safety net. We make sure that we take care of the most vulnerable in Rhode Island. That's our job as elected officials. If we can't protect children and elderly, then what are we doing here? So we have to balance that. We also we lead the country in many aspects, and we don't get reported in the media. We have a very good healthcare system with Right Care. We have a really good education. I had another call earlier this morning regarding the education of the visually impaired and the costs associated with that and what we're doing and how we're doing that. So a lot of those states that you mentioned, the Iowas, the Mississippis, they don't offer the same services we do. And I'm proud of what we do. We have a great education system. Certainly there's room for improvement, and we have some, hiccups right now. When you're comparing us to states, we spend a lot per pupil because we care about our citizens. We have a really good program for nursing homes and our seniors. We have senior centers. We have a lot of opportunity to help people. And we use that opportunity every chance we get in the General Assembly. We also take advantage of every single match that's available under the federal programs. In a lot of those states, I always want to know why our DOT budget is so high. And the reason our DOT budget is so high is because, we're on the line between freezing and not freezing in the winter, and that's what damages our roads. We spend a lot of money per capita on roads, but it's just the geographic nature of where Rhode Island is. So it's just a matter of what your priorities are. Do you want to have a priority who has a low budget state and a little bit less in taxes and not take care of people as good as we do in Rhode Island? And some people believe that, and I understand that's some part of the argument. The other part of it, the majority of people feel strongly that, in government, we're here to help people and to make sure that no one's left behind, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's opportunities to do that. All those states you mentioned, they don't have a promise program that we do in Rhode Island that gives free college education to people who can't afford it at CCRI. I'm proud of that program. I'm going to speak tonight at the House Finance Committee, not on that program, but on our housing legislation. But that's a bill we have before House Finance to make that a permanent program in the budget, the promise program. So it's a matter of what your priorities are. And I think the people of Rhode Island want priorities that they have right now. And the people in Iowa probably want the priorities they have in Iowa.
And a couple of those things you had mentioned, we will cover later in this interview, like the making the CCRI promise program in perpetuity. But I just want to shift the focus real quick with a quick follow-up before I go to the next topic. While on the topic of the budget, Governor McKee recently had released his budget proposal, and it didn't include any of the federal money from the American Rescue Plan yet when he had released it. Is there anything in that budget proposal that you don't agree with? And how do you think, and a second part of the question, how do you think the American Rescue Plan money should be spent?
So the American Rescue, let's talk about that first, so we can go to the governor's budget. The American Rescue Plan money should not be spent at all. We should not spend it. We should invest it. And there is a difference in that. What that means is that's a once in a generation amount of money that we will get in the state. And we're going to look at that. We don't even have guidance yet from Washington, the U.S. Treasury in Washington. We don't expect that until mid-May as to how we can spend it and what we can spend it on. But it's one times money, so we should spend it in a way that will help Rhode Islanders in the long term. We should use this money as an opportunity to fix our structural problems and to make investments that will benefit all of Rhode Island, everybody from the top to the bottom, all over Rhode Island for generations to come. The governor's budget, he's proposed it, did not include any of this money because he couldn't. He didn't. We don't know what we're getting. We don't know what we can't. We still don't know. But I'm very proud of the budget process we have in Rhode Island, which is very transparent. We go through this. Every single article is questioned in great detail by a member of a 15, 16 member panel of representatives. It's always televised. The public can participate in that process, especially now with COVID, they can participate. So we welcome those input from the public, and we want everything to do that. And after we conclude weeks and weeks and hundreds of hours of testimony and hearings on the budget, we amend the governor's budget and we pass it, and then we let it sit out on the desk. And that's a proverbial thing. We post it for all of Rhode Island to see for 1 week before we start enacting it and debating it and hearing it on the House floor. So it's a very good process, and I look forward to continuing that process in my first year as Speaker of the House.
So just out of curiosity, there's nothing currently in his budget proposal that you don't agree with personally?
Well, I'm not going to prejudge or anything until we have hearings on the process. We have started that process. We're looking at it. I want to make sure that specifically there are issues that arise, in all fairness to the governor, that they haven't when he put his budget together. Like specifically, I want to be able to make sure that we have enough funding and we address the situation at the Sherlock School, which is a school that helps visually impaired students. that is an issue that has bubbled up, and that's not addressed, I believe, in the governor's budget. And I look for the House to fill the gap on that issue. There are additional issues that come between now and the first week of May. And why I say the first week of May is that's when we typically and usually get our revenue estimates. Federal government has put our tax from April 15th back to May 15th. So hypothetically speaking, we're going to probably look at the possibility of, delaying our revenue conference. So we won't know that until maybe mid-May. But once we have the revenue numbers and we have hearings on the governor's budget, we'll plug all that in and we'll see what the people want. And we'll see what the stakeholders want. I mean, everybody wants more money. Some people don't want the car tax. Some people want to raise taxes. Some people want to cut taxes. We'll go through a process. It'll be public, fair, transparent, and we'll listen to all the input. And when we have consensus around something, we'll move forward on it.
And you had mentioned people do want the car tax to finally be phased out. And I now want to shift the focus to one of the goals that the previous speaker, Speaker Mattiello, had promised, that as long as he was speaker, the car tax should be phased out completely, and finally getting rid of it. There was a multi-year plan that would slowly but surely eliminate the car tax completely. Where do you stand on finally getting rid of the car tax once and for all, and fulfilling Speaker Mattiello's promise to the Rhode Islanders?
Well, I don't have that same promise. Believe me, I want the car tax removed like everyone else does, but I will look at it on a year-by-year basis. We were able to include it in the December budget that we did, and I'm proud of that. It is currently in this year's budget. Governor McKee has put it in this year's budget, so I look forward to continuing it in this year's budget. Beyond that, I don't want to prejudge it what the out years look like, because you never know. I mean, who thought a year ago we'd have a pandemic? No one knows. No one can predict what the future has. So I don't like to give long-term commitments on stuff. I believe it's a great piece of legislation. It has a tremendous amount of support from the community and as well as the cities and towns. And I look forward to, continuing it, but I don't want to make a commitment beyond this year.
And just hypothetically speaking, if it were to fully phase out once and for all, could you assure that there wouldn't be any other tax increases in other areas? Because essentially getting rid of this would be to remove the tax burden off of Rhode Islanders. Can you, if it were to finally be phased out once and for all, can you assure there won't just be another tax increase in some other random area to make up for that loss?
I can't give you that promise again for the same answer, Raymond, but I just don't know what the future has. And my goal would be not to raise a tax in another area, but you never know. It's all about revenue and needs and priorities. And I can't make those commitments until I know all the facts. And I found that if you make these commitments multi-years out, something happens, you'll say, oh, the speaker went back on his word. He said he wouldn't do it. Well, no one predicted 2 or 3 years ago we're going to have a pandemic. And you just can't make these predictions. So we could have a historic flood, a catastrophe, a superstorm. We don't know what's going to happen. There could be some act of God, another virus, another pandemic. We don't know. It could be some structure. God forbid, there could be a war with somebody. I mean, we just don't know what's going to happen. And so I never like to give those long-term commitments. I just don't think it's prudent, and I don't think it's wise. And I think I'd like to talk when people ask me this, I tell them what's important to me, what's important to the people, and what's the process. And the process will always be based on, the revenue, the needs that the state has, and the revenue that we need to meet those needs.
So as of right now, personally, you want to get rid of it, but it looks like a wait and see approach
for next year. For this year, it's in the budget. It looks pretty strong. It'll pass. I'm not giving you 100% commitment, but it looks very strong. And next year, we'll see what next year brings. Mm-hmm.
And while on the topic of the controversial vehicle-related issues in our state, another one is the tolling of tractor-trailer trucks. As of right now, the court battles are in legal limbo. Why are these tolls happening in our state? And are there any concerns that side effects like prices of things going up that are moved by those trucks could end up happening because of these tolls?
That has always been a prediction by the truckers who fought the initialization of tolls. But we haven't seen any direct increase in any products along, the supply chain in terms of they can be attributed to tolls. Why is tolling so important? Is because in our national rankings, Rhode Island has always been toward the bottom of that. And it's because of our infrastructure. We talked about it earlier, the line between freezing roads and non-freezing roads in Rhode Island, where we are geographically. Our roads are in very poor shape. And what we need to do as a state is to come up with a funding mechanism so our bridges don't collapse and our roads are good. And that's part of why we can improve in our national rankings. So at the end of the day, I voted for the tolls. I was a co-sponsor of it. I do support them. I believe it's a good funding mechanism. And tolling is not new. It might be new to Rhode Island, but if you travel up and down the country in Florida and everywhere else that I have been, I see tolls everywhere. So it's not a new mechanism. It's new to Rhode Island, and I get it. And we are not going to extend tolling to cars, not as long as, I can see in the foreseeable future. The reality is that the trucks who do the most damage and use the roads the most, should pay their fair share of this.
And you had mentioned the concern of it going to cars. There is a concern that if this does lose in a court battle, this could just set a precedent that it can't only be trucks, but all vehicles will have to be tolled, including cars. Critics argue that instead of doing these tolls, that could be extended to vehicles and might end up depending on the legal challenges result to make money to repair the damaged bridges. Why not just cut unnecessary spending and find ways to let the state economy thrive, and then you can get that revenue from those sources like income tax, as opposed to tolling trucks and making prices of transported goods go up. With all that in consideration, you had mentioned you don't want to bring it to cars. Can you assure the people of Rhode Island that there won't be tolls on cars as well, and stand by Speaker Mattiello's promise of not putting tolls on cars as well?
Yeah, it's not just a promise. It's written right into the law, by the way. It's written right into law. It would take an act of both the House and the Senate and the governor to sign it. So if any one of those branches didn't agree, it would not happen. You said, why not find, the savings somewhere else in the budget? Well, that means, Raymond, is which taxes do you want to raise? That's a nice way of saying finding the savings is cut a social program or two and or raise taxes. That's how you find savings, one of those two ways. It's not like there's money hidden somewhere in the budget. We can, overturn this stone and we found a pot of $100 million. Let's use that. No, there's no $100 million under the stone. It's all accounted for and it's all spent and it's all allocated. And what we need to do is prioritize. The voters felt pretty comfortable about this. And I remember, there was a lot of talk when the toll program, by the way, isn't new. It's about 4 or 5 years old. And there was a lot of talk that if you voted for the tolls, you were going to lose at the election. And in that year in the House, we lost 2 incumbents, and the 2 incumbents that we lost were 2 incumbents who voted against the toll plan. So nobody lost their seat for that. I think the people of Rhode Island can actually, no one likes construction and delays, but they can see bridges being fixed, they can see roads being paved, and it doesn't really cost them anything extra. And I think the overwhelming majority of people are satisfied with the program, the way it's working, the way it's funded. I'm a little bit familiar with the legislation. I know everyone likes to think that it's, a 50-50 shot, but under, our whole constitutional theory, there's what they call the presumption of validity. When the government acts, it's presumed valid, and the burden is on the moving party, in this case, the truckers, to prove it otherwise. I feel reasonably confident in the legal analysis that I've looked at it, thinks that this is a sustainable, legally permitted path. And we'll see what the court systems bring through this process. But I will tell you, the new administration is looking at tolling as a way to fund some of their infrastructure, including the gas tax as well in Washington. So this may all become a moot point if Washington moves to do something similar to this as well. The constitutional challenge of this may become moot.
And before I move on to the next topic, back kind of to that fiscal responsibility argument of where you can find the money. Those on the fiscally conservative side of the aisle also are promoting ideas like opening up an inspector general's office to find and combat waste and fraud and inefficiency in government, as well as line item veto. So the governor could veto specific line items in the budget that would eliminate instances of poor spending that are jammed through last minute. Would you be in favor of either of those?
No, I would look at each thing on its merits, but let's point out a couple of things when you talk about the fiscal. You mentioned line item veto. I mean, there was a commission that studied the issue. There hasn't been a lot of support for that, in my mind, from the public or from the members at all regarding that issue. I mean, I had a good relationship with Governor Raimondo. She has never raised the issue with me. I am developing a very good relationship with Governor McKee. He hasn't raised the issue with me at all. So we'll see how that process plays out. And by the way, it's not up to the General Assembly to have line item veto. It's up to the voters in a constitutional amendment, whether we have either by the General Assembly putting it on the ballot or a constitutional convention. And those haven't happened in years. So I don't really know how much savings you would get. The budget, as I said to you, is extremely transparent. We leave it on the desk. Everyone knows about it. A couple of years ago, there was some funding to a controversial doctor in Cranston. The media found it and it was taken out of the budget. It wasn't like it jammed through or snuck through. Every budget, every governor gets 90% of what he wants in a budget. We like to think that, the legislature has the power, but in reality, the governor gets pretty much what he wants in a budget. That's the way the process works. And we tweak around the edges. If there's some priorities that we have, we certainly put them in the budget. What was the other part of your question about the fiscal conservatism, about the Inspector General? Inspector General, look, we already have one. It's called an Attorney General, and he does a job, and he's constitutional office. You see the Attorney General speaking out now on issues, including the hospital up at San Barano, talking about a state agency, CRMC. We have an Auditor General. We have two, independent parts of government doing their work. Inspector General is a red herring. I think it's just another way of creating another state agency and funding it. You have to have an Inspector General is going to have so much money. We have one. It's called an Attorney General, and Peter Nerone is doing a phenomenal job in raising these issues and looking at different parts of state government that need attention. We also have oversight. That Senate has an oversight and the House has an oversight. And directly because of the House oversight, we saw a change in leadership at San Barano Hospital just 2 weeks ago. So the system, I think, by and large works. Is it a perfect system? No, but I don't want anybody to think that if we have an Inspector General, that's going to solve all the problems of the world. And because if it was, we would have done it a long time ago. It just adds another layer of bureaucracy and another department that has to be funded by the state budget.
Shifting the focus back to the current issues, there are bills that are currently in the state Senate right now that aren't popular amongst Rhode Islanders. One that I wanted to get your take on is Senate Bill 64, which would allow speed cameras to be all over the state of Rhode Island and not just in school zones. Mr. Speaker, would you ever allow this bill to pass in the state house to eventually have it make its way to the governor's desk, and why or why not?
I never want to say that the speaker said it won't pass, will pass, because I leave that up to my member-driven chamber. And I doubt that a bill like that would have broad-based support in my chamber. I would certainly not vote for it. I don't think my membership would either. I mean, the reason we had speed cameras initially put in was to protect students. It wasn't a way to enhance revenue for the cities and towns. There are many other ways they can look at raising revenue. And that's their prerogative, but I don't believe a wholesale, remote police department or remote cameras that collect revenue is the prudent way to go. I'm only voicing my opinion as my own local rep. It would not be popular in Warwick. It would not be popular in my district for sure.
And while on the topic of bills being introduced, I have mixed reactions. One of them, most notably, is the charter school moratorium bill. Governor McKee said that he would veto it if it made its way to his desk. Where do you stand on this bill, and would you vote in favor of overriding that veto?
So we're not sure that the bill is even going to pass. It's in the House Finance Committee, and we're looking at ways to probably work with the governor and the proponents of the bill, which is the teachers union, to see if there's a middle ground to make sure that we can't come up with some kind of a compromise that addresses that. So it's currently under consideration. We'd have to see what the final product is before I would tell you how I'd vote on it.
And just out of curiosity, where do you stand on the bill personally as a local state rep for your constituents?
I'm listening to it. We don't have any charter schools in Warwick, but I recognize that it's an opportunity for some people, especially in the minority community, to be able to go to a school that's what I would call a high performing school. And I recognize also the cost involved. And I think there's a middle ground somewhere to be found, and we're going to work hard to try to get that. So I keep an open mind on it. But generally, I think that these decisions made by the Department of Education need to be carefully considered before they're either overruled or appealed to the General Assembly. And that's my philosophy just in general. A lot of people, we're not talking about charter schools now, but in general, are not happy with the decision. They run to the General Assembly. And I think there's a better mechanism, which is an appeal process, to go through that. But at the end of the day, we cannot lose focus on going back to charter schools. What the purpose here is what is best for the student, not what's best for the state or the cities and towns or the union. What's best for the student. And that's the same thing I said. I had a call with Commissioner Alfonte and the union today on another issue altogether. And I said to them in a very strong tone that we have to remember not to lose focus of what is best for the children. And that particular call had to do with the visually impaired students. So it's the same philosophy that I follow. Let's look, what is this intended to do? Who's it helping? Who's it hurting? Are we doing the right thing here? So that's part of my thought process.
Is there any deal breakers you would have that would determine your decision on whether or not to vote to override that veto?
Again, you're talking about a veto for something that hasn't been passed yet, so it's hard to give you some.
It most likely will pass, however.
Why do you say that?
It's most likely going to pass, and that actually leads into my next question, because a lot of the Democrats in the state legislature have become more and more against charter schools. Just out of curiosity, why has that become more of a reality? And is it partly due to any fear of pushback and anger from the teachers' unions?
So I disagree with you respectfully, Raymond, with your argument. I don't think that anybody, at least in my chamber, has pre-decided that. I mean, if people certainly have points of view, but we listen to everything. At the end of this week, we're taping this on Tuesday. By Thursday, we will have heard over 1,100 pieces of legislation in roughly 2 months. And you may think you feel this way on something until you actually hear points of view from people on all sides of an issue, whether it's the gun bills, whether it's the charter school bill, whether it's abortion, whether it's tax and spending, whether it's budget, and it changes your point of view. So I don't predispose anything is going to happen or not happen. I think that the governor felt very strongly, and I think that his testimony had an opinion. The unions felt very strongly; their testimony had some opinion. But we need to look at what's best for the students, and that's how we're going to make a decision based on the benefit of the students. So I would not presuppose anything will pass or not pass. I think it'll go through on the merits. Mm-hmm.
And just one last quick follow-up before I go to the next topic. There are a lot of polls that indicate that parents and Rhode Islanders are more in favor of charter schools now more than ever before. Has that been taken into consideration when looking at this?
I haven't seen those polls, but I believe some of that was brought up in testimony, so it'll be given its appropriate weight as part of the hearing process. Mm-hmm.
And moving on to the next topic, another focus which you had mentioned towards the beginning of this interview, the General Assembly is currently making the Rhode Island Promise Scholarship permanent. This makes 2 years of CCRI tuition free for whoever qualifies for that scholarship, with one of the requirements being a GPA of 2.5 or higher. Are there any plans to extend this to colleges like Rick and URI, or is it still going to only be for CCRI?
Now, the bill has a great sponsor, by the way. I'm being facetious because it's a bill that I sponsored. But the reality is that, no, the bill currently in its form and the intended, at least in the short term, is to just keep it at CCRI, because that's all, quite frankly, that we can afford. It's about a $7 million allocation out of the state budget.
And looking at the effects it could have on colleges like Rick, it hurts the school's enrollment, hurts Rick's budget. A student could just not go to Rick for 2 years, which adds on to the bigger ripple effect it has on Rick and URI, other than the $7 million you had mentioned that it said it would take. Even pre-pandemic, the enrollment was down because of the CCRI Promise program. How do you plan as Speaker to make sure that those concerns are addressed in the process of making the Rhode Island Promise permanent? And why are these concerns not being taken into account or even paid attention to?
Well, I disagree with you again, man. They are being taken into account, and they are being there. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, some people will choose to go to the Promise program and not go to a paying school. But overwhelming, the by and large evidence that I have seen is that people who are going to the Promise really wouldn't go to any other school. They wouldn't be able to. Now, enrollment is down at Rick for a lot of reasons, not chiefly because we're in a pandemic. And, but at some of the other four-year institutions, enrollment's at an all-time high. So there has to be a look at the comprehensive way you look at these things. And I don't want to blame the Promise as the best program in the world that solves all the problems, because it doesn't. And I don't want to say it's the worst worst program ever. And that's why Rick is hurting, or other institutions are hurting. You need to look at all the facts. It has to be comprehensive. You have to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. So it's easy to say, because of the Promise, our enrollment's down at Rick, but you have to look beyond that assertion and what do the facts show, and why are they down, and what programs are you offering, and how many students are in class, and how many, you have a class of 15 students, you have a class of 30 students. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done. And when these classes are being offered, a lot of classes are being offered at inconvenient times. So there's all kinds of factors that go into that. And that one slogan you just said is not one slogan that fits all. So I respectfully disagree with that assertion, and I think you need to look at them individually. But the Promise program, I think, is good because it's giving people an opportunity who, for the most part, the majority of people in the Promise program would never attend college. They would never go to an institution and get a college degree. And they're usually the first person in their family. It's giving them an opportunity to create a better life, a sustaining life for them and their families. And I think it's a good program. And by the way, when we talked about it earlier, you list Rhode Island with those other states of Iowa, and I forgot the other 2 or 3 you mentioned. To the best of my knowledge, they don't have anything like a Promise program. So that's why our government, our budget is more than theirs, because we do more than theirs.
Now, you had mentioned that the pandemic was a big reason why the RIC's enrollment was down. I mean, it was down pre-pandemic as well, and it was down after the CCRI promise was first initially became a reality, because pre-pandemic, that is when it came about, and enrollment was down for RIC. How do you plan to address those kinds of concerns as Speaker?
Well, I know the Department of Education and the Board of Higher Education is looking at RIC. They just completed a consulting study on what's the best way to address it. And some of the things I mentioned before is the classroom size. I think we can increase some of the classroom size. I think we can have better times for when the classes are offered and a better variety. And I think that, there are some programs at RIC that are very good programs, but they're very little attended. And I think they need to do a little bit job of selling it. I think Dr. Sanchez fully understands what he's being faced with and his challenges are. And I think he's capable of meeting those challenges. And I leave those decisions to the Department of Education to solve. We are a legislature. We don't micromanage the Department of Education and how they operate. The only time we step in if there's either a problem or a need. And right now I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to the college to come up with their own plan that solves the declining enrollment. And if they can't, then the General Assembly would look at either making changes at the university, at the college, or on the way we fund it or how we do it. But right now, I'm going to leave it to them. I like to give people who are running the show the opportunity to run their own programs and only intervene if there's a need for us. So right now, I will defer to them.
And shifting to another current priority the General Assembly has, which is legalizing marijuana in the state, there are highlighted pros, saying the pros are potential revenue. However, there are a lot of cons highlighted by the critics of the legalization of marijuana, whether it's the increase in crime, car accidents, insurance from that potential increase, insurance rates from the potential increase in car accidents, and something that here in Providence is a big problem, which is a ridiculous amount of speed bumps. It's like every 55 feet speed bump. Have those concerns been taken into consideration for the issue of the legalization of marijuana in Rhode Island? And if so, how could they be addressed in the process of passing that? Or up to you.
Every year, the General Assembly takes 3 or 4 or 5 big issues, and marijuana has been a perennial one. But last year, we didn't do any of those big issues. So this year, we're facing, big issues with the IGT merger, with nursing home staffing, with charter schools that we discussed earlier, with lots of other issues. So marijuana is still one of those perennial issues. I don't know what's going to happen with marijuana. It's very early in the game. I don't know if it'll pass this year. It may not. I mean, the governor has a plan. The Senate has a plan. Some of the advocates have a plan. Depending on who gives you the plan, it's slighted toward the cultivators, or it's slighted toward the compassion centers, or whatever. I will tell you, in general, it is not this big revenue number that everyone keeps thinking. They're talking about revenue, they're talking about gross sales. They're not talking about net to the state of Rhode Island. And when you look at net to the state of Rhode Island, the numbers are not that significant. So I want to make sure that we do good policy. I want to make sure, I would rather wait another year on marijuana if we can't come to a conclusion that is good for the state. And that we have to look at the end of the day, it's not just about revenue. We need to look at all kinds of issues regarding justice reinvention. If there's people in prisons for marijuana and we're now legalizing it, should they get a second chance at an expungement? That's one issue. Should we look at, if we're creating this new industry, should we look at whether there's an opportunity for minority enterprise in there? Will we set aside some of these compassion centers for minority people? These are the things that we need to look at. So there's a lot to do on this. And, the Senate's taking a lead on it, and the governor's taking a lead on it. I'm not sure where the House's position is going to fall, but we're going to look at all of this, and we're going to try to craft something. We could do it at the end of this year, or we could not. I mean, it depends on where we go on it.
And just out of curiosity, shifting back to the question, have any of those concerns had listed, like the increases in crime, car accidents, insurance rates from the potential increase in car accidents, and the ridiculous amount of speed bumps, has that been taken into consideration so far?
Yes and no, everything you said except speed bumps. No one's talked about speed bumps to me. You're the only one who's raised that issue. But yes, the insurance industry is very concerned about the raise in rates. And if you look at Colorado, one of the things that happened is that they've increased home insurance, auto insurance has gone up dramatically since the institution of legalized marijuana in Colorado. And I know that's an issue from Amika's perspective and also law enforcement. How do you test if a driver is impaired? We know how to do that pretty good. If he's impaired with alcohol, we're not quite sure how we do that impairment with marijuana. So all of the issues other than speed bumps have been talked about at the hearings, and we're going to continue to hear them as we go through the budget.
And just out of curiosity, because the second part of that was how could they be addressed?
I don't know. That's part of the budget process. I don't have an answer yet. We'll have to look at that. I mean, one of the things that we look at when these issues happen, we look how other states have addressed it. And we sometimes look at them for guidance and how has it worked in Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, even Idaho, even Iowa, even Florida, how when they've legalized it, what has been the pitfalls, what have been the problems. We're fortunate enough that in our house, we are a member of several national organizations. They've become a great resource to us. So we can reach out to NCLS, that's the National Council of State Legislatures, and see how it works. We can look at SLLF, State Legislative Leaders Foundation. We can look at lots of different organizations as they become resources for us to find best practices on any issue, not just marijuana.
And I have one more political topic, and then we'll get to the infamous last question that I asked as non-political. So kind of shifting the focus for a second, this potential revenue is presumably being used for things like the Green New Deal in Rhode Island, which is a number of ambitious goals that have been covered on the show that are being proposed by the more progressive wing of the Democratic caucus in the state legislature for ideas that maybe say 10 years ago wouldn't have been thought of, such as housing for all, Medicare for all, the Act on Climate, which recently passed, and in Providence's case, our mayor wants to use potential marijuana revenue for his reparations program that he's moving forward with, and et cetera. It is argued that forcing through these ideas that sound good on paper isn't fiscally possible with just things like marijuana revenue, speed camera revenue, which would result in the major tax increases for the middle and working class. There are talks of it being just only the rich and institutions like Brown University being taxed, but there aren't any ballpark figures either that are being set. And that is sort of worrisome, especially when you see how much they cost on the national level, which is at minimum 10 trillion for the Green New Deal. And in Rhode Island's case, we see taxes on things already like Social Security, funerals, vehicles, 7% sales tax when Massachusetts is lower, and et cetera. So this is a bit of a multi-part question, and my apologies for it being a mouthful. How are these proposals and ideas you're allowing to be voted on and passed through the House going to be paid for in reality? Would taxpayers in the middle and working class see their taxes go up in any way, shape, or form? And with an already inflated budget that barely could be afforded on its own pre-American Rescue Plan money, is it sensible for these to pass these kind of things?
Well, you keep assuming that we're going to pass every bill that gets introduced, Raymond. It doesn't work that way. So we introduce like 1,100 pieces of legislation. We may pass 200 to 300 bills. So as part of this process, the hearing process, deliberative process, it takes sometimes years to pass bill. And everything you said is all taken into consideration. The cost of it, how it's going to affect our population, how it's going to affect business, how it's going to affect jobs, how it's going to affect the middle class, the upper class, the lower class. You know, all that's in a thought process. So don't presume that just because a bill goes in that says something, it's automatically going to pass and we're going to have to figure out a way to do it. We try to figure out a way to do it before we pass a bill, how it's going to be affected and everything else. So we look to be deliberate and slow. Legislation that the founding fathers set up this process, it is deliberately slow. I will tell you that, which I tell the freshman class when we do orientation, I have one of the best pieces of legislation, in my opinion, that passed about 5 or 6 years ago. It's called the Qualified Jobs Incentive Tax Program. And it gives businesses a tax break for every new person they employ. They're high-paying private sector jobs. There's really no cost or very little cost to the state of Rhode Island on this jobs plan. And in reality here, that it took 3 years to pass that bill, because I didn't have any support the first time and I had to build more support the second time and I needed to explain things. And finally, on the third attempt, it passed. And it was a good program, and it remains a good program today, but it took 3 years to pass it. So a lot of those ideas you talked about, some of them take a long time to pass, some of them take 4 or 5, some of them may never pass. Excuse me. So we'll go through the process. You have to get, 51% of the colleagues in the room to support it. You have to get the other chamber to support it. And then you get to get the governor to sign off on it. And then if someone really doesn't like it, you got to withstand a court challenge to the bill. So there's a lot of checks and balances. Government is intended to go slow because these are new ideas and people should be able to adjust to them as we come. So you mentioned the Act on Climate. That's a bill that's going to be over the next 30 years. All kinds of milestones and checks and balances, plans that get published and reported every 5 years. So it's a long window before you see the full effects and the benefits of that bill, because that's the way that government should work, is slow and deliberate and thoughtful and pass good legislation. And good doesn't necessarily mean a lot. Good means good. Mm-hmm.
And I understand that you it's not just a blind presumption. The thing is, when looking at this topic, the Democrats have a supermajority in the Senate and the House, and you're seeing a lot more progressive members go into that caucus. I believe there was a bunch of incumbents knocked off in the 2020 election due to outreach from groups like the Rhode Island Political Co-op, for example. And even Senate President Ruggiero had a very close primary election versus a more progressive challenger. That's why it's more likely these ideas are going to pass, because there is fear of the pushback from the more increasing progressive wing. And just out of curiosity, since it was a multi-part question and that was it was quite a mouthful for me to ask it like one by one, I'll just do it kind of in like a 1-2 part. If it was up to you, would any taxpayers in the middle or working class see their taxes go up in any way, shape, or form?
I can't say yes or no. My goal is never to raise taxes on anybody, but you just don't know. It's all about the revenue numbers that come in. If we need the revenue numbers, then we have to look at everything's on the table. That's why when you asked earlier about the reduction of the car tax, I mean, it's a lot easier to delay a tax cut than it is to institute a tax raise. So I need to keep all the options on the table. I don't want to raise taxes on anybody unless I absolutely have to.
And is it with the budget being at its highest it's ever been, and the last budget had previously had a shortfall of $500 million? Is it sensible to pass these kind of things when it seemed like it was very hard to afford the budget as it was before these ideas that don't have a ballpark figure yet?
A couple of things I will tell you. Let's break down that issue about the budget being so high in 1 minute. But let me address. It's about priorities. It's really about what you want to do as a government. I mean, do you want to pass pro-business, pro-growth jobs? Do you want to press, big social service programs? And I go wherever my caucus wants, which is in the House, wherever the majority of the House wants. So it depends. You're correct. Elections have consequences. So you elect people with a certain persuasion, you can expect the government ultimately will pass those bills or lean toward that way. So it's a check and it's a balance in the process, and including the governor. The other point I want to make, when you talked about the budget has ballooned to $13 billion, or it's been bigger than before, that's misleading in terms of the skinny budget and this budget, because there's a lot of federal money that came in because of the pandemic that goes to the states and then goes right out to the people. In terms of, like, give me an example, all of the unemployment, the so-called enhanced unemployment that everyone's talking about. There was a $600 bonus on top of your regular unemployment, and then now there's a $300 bonus on top of your regular unemployment. The reason for those things is, the reason our budget is because of those things. Our budget has gone up. That money is given from the federal government to the state, the Department of Labor Training, and the Department of Labor Training determines, is Raymond Bakari eligible? And then they pass it through the state and it goes to Raymond Bakari. And that's why our budget numbers went up in the last year and this year, is because of all the federal aid that is actually the states being a conduit for that and making sure that it goes out to the right people. So we have to include that in our budget. Money in matches money out. And that's why our budget has gone up significantly.
And the last part, my last follow-up before I go to the non-political topic for the end of this interview, we already have things like a Social Security tax, a car tax, even a tax for funerals, 7% sales tax. It's just, are the concerns being noted when it comes to something like, say, for example, the Green New Deal, 10 trillion nationally? There isn't a ballpark figure being spoken about. And let's just say hypothetically it's 5 billion and the budget's already at 12 billion. That would then make it go up to what, 17 billion? Are there any concerns that are being noted that with all these taxes like Social Security taxes, 7% sales tax, that there could be even more taxes that in unnecessary areas. Like I heard there was even a mileage tax being proposed on a national level. It could even possibly come
Well,
down to the state.
let me go to the mileage tax. The reason that there's talk of a mileage tax is because there's always been a gas tax, and that has funded the federal DOT program. And now with nobody buying gas, or a lot less gas, because people are buying electric cars or hybrid cars, so the consumption of gasoline is going down and the tax is going down. But the need to keep the roads, from a federal standpoint, and the bridges up and running and repaired and good, paved and everything else doesn't go away, because we're shifting from gas to electric in terms of the modes of transportation. And we're also getting more trains and buses, so that we're using, public transportation more, and that also lowers the gas tax. That's why there's a mileage tax. So yeah, we look at all of that stuff, but you again, you refer to you said $5 billion for the Climate Act. We don't have any idea what that way, because no plan has been established. And the way the plan established is to lower the emissions, and there are many ways you can do it. Let me give you an example. General Motors and Ford are going to an all-electric fleet by the year 2035. That's only 14 years from now. In 14 years, you won't be able to buy a gas car a new one from General Motors or from Ford. You're going to buy all electric trucks, all electric cars. So that's a way we're going to lower our emissions in the state of Rhode Island without costing anybody anything. So there's a lot of different ways to look at this stuff, and not necessarily it's all about money and a tax. We have to be creative. We have to look at innovation, what's happening. Corporate America is already there. Corporate America is going green. Whether the state of Rhode Island wants to participate or not, that's another story, another debate. But the majority of people going, and I've seen polling data where people your age, a lot younger than me, I'm a little bit older than you. The reality, yeah, you're laughing, it's true. The reality is protecting the environment and climate change is a very important issue to young people. And they're making sure that if they're buying plastics, it's reusable plastics, it's recycled plastic. They have a much more socially conscious awareness of the environment, and they want to protect it, they want to preserve it for their lifetime and their children's lifetime. And that's what we did when we passed the Climate Act, and the governor signed it last Saturday. We want to make sure we leave Rhode Island just as beautiful as we found it for the next generation of Rhode Islanders behind us.
And I know I did say that was the last follow-up. My apologies for asking another follow-up on this, because this is quite an extensive topic. Just so I'm looking at it, because you had mentioned I mentioned the $5 billion ballpark figure. That's more of a hypothetical, because nationally, a Green New Deal, when Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez had introduced it, she said it was going to cost at minimum $10 trillion a year. And if you did that on a state level, a ballpark figure like 5 billion doesn't seem too out of the loop. Just looking at it, and aside from climate, there are things like Medicare for all, that the worry is that while there are already taxes like Social Security tax, a vehicle tax, funeral tax, 7% sales tax, while Massachusetts is just 5%, there are concerns that there will just be other taxes piled on to get that revenue. And you had mentioned it's noted. So just out of curiosity, because you have said multiple times you don't want to raise taxes, if we were to see something like that, where you would see an increase in another increase in a bunch of taxes for middle class workers, would you support it?
No, I won't give you that answer until I know I got a lot more facts before I'm going to support any tax increase. I need to know why and how come and how much. I never like to talk in hypotheticals, especially way off in the future. And what we passed with the Climate Act, so I don't know what AOC is talking about in Washington. And to be honest, I haven't read her plan, but all we did was make sure the state develops a plan in the next 5 years and shares it with us. And what people don't realize is we've already reduced our greenhouse emissions by 10% in Rhode Island, by just the beginning of solar and wind in Rhode Island. We have a long way to go over the next 30 years. So there's many things we can do that don't require a tax increase. And if we don't like the way the plan is coming from the climate bill that we passed, the General Assembly can step in at any time and change that. So it's not like we passed it and we've absolved ourselves of any responsibility. We don't have to worry about it. We're going to pay very close attention to what kind of a plan is developed in the next 4 to 5 years.
And now shifting to the last question, which is the non-political topic. My apologies for going. We went quite extensively into the fiscal responsibility and all that, but that's the goal of the show. To always get all the details, let both sides have the fair shot of getting their points across, and leave all logical fallacies at the door. Just shifting to the final question, which is one that I ask everyone on the show to keep tradition, which is, in your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
Uh, by far, it's our beaches, the 400 miles of coastline. They don't call us the ocean state for anything. Rhode Island is beautiful. I can't think of a better place to be in the world in the summertime than Rhode Island. I'm from Warwick. We have 39 miles of beaches, public beaches, city and town beaches all over the state. Cold State Park, Rocky Point, and Goddard State Park, and those are two that are beautiful. I walk my dog at Rocky Point regularly. I live at Connecticut Point Park, which is a city park. So I'm in love with the coastline, and I'm in love with the access that people enjoy, and called the ocean state for any other reason that we are the ocean state. It's a beautiful state.
It sure is. I believe the motto is 30 minutes away from water and a beach at all times. Is that how the motto goes?
I don't know, but it works for me.
I believe so. I think it is 30 minutes. So we're always 30 minutes away, no matter where you are in the state from water, which it is. It is a beautiful state. Miss Speaker Shekarchi, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure of mine to have you on.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. I mean, good luck to you. Larry was right. You do have a budding career in journalism. So good luck to you, sir.
Thank you. And thank you again for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV, or even reading the political profiles article on the Anchor. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on this channel, please click the subscribe button down below, along with the post notification bell icon to the right of it. Or if you want to read the future political profiles articles as they're posted, visit anchorweb.org. I'm Raymond Bakari. I'll see you on the next episode.